With the mystical Messiah, a narrative of Sabbatai Zevi in the summer of 1648, as the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe mourned the devastation of the Smyrna massacres. A child was born in Smyrna on the 9th of Av, the day commemorating the destruction of both temples in Jerusalem. His parents named him Sabbatai, and from his earliest years he seemed marked by destiny, or perhaps by something darker. Sabbatai Zevi grew into a young man of extraordinary beauty and magnetic presence. His eyes burned with an intensity that unsettled rabbis and captivated disciples. He studied Kabbalah obsessively, spending nights in mystical contemplations, fasting until his body became gaunt, and immersing himself in the frigid waters of ritual baths, even in winter. The sacred texts spoke to him in ways they spoke to no one else, or so he believed. By his early 20s, Sabbatai began experiencing what he called illuminations, periods of ecstatic joy, when he felt the divine presence flowing through him like liquid light. During these episodes, he would perform strange acts that violated Jewish law, pronouncing the ineffable name of God, which was forbidden, celebrating festivals on the wrong dates, eating forbidden foods. When confronted by the horrified religious authorities of Smyrna, he would explain that he operated under a higher law, that the old restrictions no longer applied to him. But these illuminations were followed by descents into profound darkness, periods of melancholy so deep that he could barely move or speak, when the world seemed drained of all color and meaning. In these times he would lie in his room for weeks, tormented by thoughts he could not share. Around 1648, during one of his ecstatic periods, Sabbatai declared something that would change his life forever. He announced that he was the Messiah, the anointed one who would redeem Israel and restore the Jewish people to their ancient glory. The rabbis of Smyrna were not amused. They excommunicated him and drove him from the city. Thus began years of wandering, to Salonika, to Constantinople, to Cairo, to Jerusalem, always attracting followers with his charisma and mystical teachings, always eventually expelled when his antinomian behavior became too scandalous. In Jerusalem in 1662, Sabbatai met a woman as strange as himself. Sarah was a survivor of the Khmelnytsky pogroms, rescued from a convent where she had been hidden as a child. She had declared that she was destined to marry the Messiah and lived a life that scandalized respectable society. When Sabbatai heard of her, he sent for her, and they were married in Cairo. It seemed a union of two damaged souls who had found in Messianic fantasy a refuge from unbearable trauma. But the true turning point came in 1665, when Sabbatai traveled to Gaza and met Nathan of Gaza, a young mystic and visionary who would become his prophet. Nathan had experienced a revelation. Sabbatai Zevi was indeed the Messiah, and the redemption was at hand. Nathan possessed what Sabbatai lacked: theological sophistication and organizational genius. He composed letters and treatises explaining Sabbatai's mission in elaborate Kabbalistic terms, and these documents spread like wildfire across the Jewish world. The timing was perfect. The year 1666 was widely believed to be a year of cosmic significance. The Jewish communities of Europe and the Middle East were traumatized by persecution and yearning for deliverance. When news arrived that the Messiah had appeared, that he was performing miracles and preparing to march on Constantinople to claim the Sultan's crown before proceeding to Jerusalem, a wave of Messianic hysteria swept through the Jewish world. In Amsterdam and Hamburg, in Venice and Livorno, in Poland and Morocco, Jews sold their possessions and prepared for the journey to the Holy Land. They fasted and prayed, did penance for their sins, and experienced prophetic visions. Respectable merchants danced in the streets. Women fell into trances and prophesied. The established rabbinical authorities found themselves powerless to stop the movement. Many were themselves swept up in the fervor, while those who resisted were shouted down by ecstatic crowds. Sabbatai returned to Smyrna in triumph in the fall of 1665. The city that had expelled him now welcomed him as a king. He entered the synagogue on horseback, abolished the fast commemorating the destruction of the temple, and declared that soon all fasts would become festivals. He distributed the kingdoms of the earth among his followers, appointed kings and princes of the restored Israel. In December 1665, Sabbatai set sail for Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Nathan had prophesied that he would peacefully take the crown from the Sultan. But the Ottoman authorities were less impressed by Messianic claims than his followers had been. When his ship arrived, Sabbatai was immediately arrested and thrown into prison. Yet even imprisonment could not dim the movement's fervor. Sabbatai's followers bribed the guards to transfer him to a fortress at Abydos on the Dardanelles, where he held court like a king, receiving pilgrims from across Europe and the Middle East. The contributions of the faithful kept him in luxury. Delegations arrived bearing gifts and seeking blessings. The prison became a palace, and the movement continued to grow. But the Ottoman authorities were growing concerned. This Jewish Messianic movement was becoming a threat to public order. In September 1666, Sabbatai was brought to the Sultan's palace at Adrianople and given a choice: convert to Islam or die. On September 16, 1666, Sabbatai Zevi, the man who had proclaimed himself the Messiah and Redeemer of Israel, placed a Turkish turban on his head and became Mehmet Efendi. Fair Muslim, the news shattered the Jewish world. The shock was so profound that some communities refused to believe it, insisting it was Ottoman propaganda. But it was true. The Messiah had apostatized. Most of his followers abandoned him in despair and humiliation, but remarkably a core group remained faithful. Led by Nathan of Gaza, they developed elaborate theological explanations. Sabbatai's apostasy was itself a mystical act, a descent into the realm of evil to rescue the holy sparks trapped there. The Messiah had to violate the Torah to transcend the Torah. His apparent sin was actually the deepest form of holiness. These believers, who came to be called Sabbateans, continued to follow him in secret, some even converting outwardly to Islam, while maintaining their own strange synthesis of Jewish and Islamic practice. Sabbatai himself lived the remaining 10 years of his life in this liminal state, outwardly a Muslim, inwardly still claiming messianic status, surrounded by a small circle of devoted followers. He died in exile in Albania in 1676, still insisting on his divine mission, still experiencing his cycles of illumination and darkness. Nathan of Gaza continued to defend him until Nathan's own death in 1680, writing treatises explaining how Sabbatai's death was merely an occultation and he would return. The Sabbatean movement persisted in secret for generations, fragmenting into various mystical sects. In the 18th century, it would produce Jacob Frank, who led his own messianic movement and mass conversion to Catholicism. The trauma of Sabbatai Zevi's apostasy left deep scars in Jewish collective memory, making Jewish authorities deeply suspicious of messianic claims and mystical enthusiasm for centuries afterward. Historians still debate what Sabbatai Zevi truly was: a charlatan who cynically manipulated the hopes of a traumatized people, a mentally ill man whose manic depressive cycles were interpreted as divine possession, a genuine mystic who believed his own visions, or perhaps something more complex, a man who became trapped in a role that others projected onto him, who found in the messianic fantasy a way to give meaning to his own psychological torment, and who, when faced with death, chose the ultimate transgression rather than martyrdom. What remains undeniable is the power of hope and desperation, the hunger for redemption that can sweep through a suffering people, and the dangerous alchemy that occurs when charisma meets trauma in times of apocalyptic expectation. The story of Sabbatai Zevi is a reminder that the line between prophet and madman, between divine inspiration and delusion, between redemption and catastrophe, can be terrifyingly thin.